Ms. Kathy Gibbs is a chartered structural engineer and an enthusiastic practitioner of and advocate for best practice and appropriate design for the built environment. This is with a keen focus on sustainable environmental, economic, and social development, and beyond resilient design, health, and well-being of people and planet at the aim. She currently holds the role of Sustainability Manager for the England and Wales Cricket Board, where she works across all departments, looking at improving sustainability outcomes for the EBC and for cricket across their network. Her presentation today is titled Sustainability Plan for Cricket in England and Wales. Please let us welcome Ms. Kathy Gibbs.
Hello, thank you everybody. I am just gonna get my presentation up. Hold on a second, bear with me. Hopefully you can all see that. Can anybody just like signal that you've
We're seeing it.
Brilliant.
We're seeing it.
Okay, thanks everybody, and thanks for changing the agenda. I am actually sat in a meeting room in a hotel in Manchester on my way back to London after a long day, 2 days of conferences and so forth. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to join your conference to see much of the other presentations, which is a huge disappointment for me, because I know that the agenda was really quite rich and I was quite interested to hear more from the other presenters, but hopefully I'll get to see some updates and highlights. So yes, thanks everybody. Yes, indeed, I am actually a chartered structural engineer, but I haven't been doing very much engineering for quite a while. I've been mostly doing multidisciplinary design management, project management, and looking more and more at sustainability in the built environment. And about a year and a half ago or more, I switched from construction and development into sport and cricket specifically, which is quite interesting for everybody. And so I think this presentation is a bit of a light, not very much about engineering in specifics, but can give you maybe an insight to the other side of the fence, because some of you might have clients working in sport, some of you might be cricket enthusiasts, and some of you might generally be interested in what cricket has to say in this area. And it might be food for thought for other things. So let me just dive straight in. I really like this slide. This is from the New York Times, which is quite interesting, being an American publication, talking about cricket and highlighting cricket's vulnerability to the climate crisis. It is one of the most vulnerable sports and most kind of sits on a knife edge, and how you can continue participation in sport given the challenges. And, you know, this is actually a map of the world showing membership within the ICC, the global governing body for cricket, with obviously, for those of you who are cricket enthusiasts will recognize the red areas, including obviously the West Indies, as being major cricketing nations or bodies. And then actually a lot of fewer people are aware that we also have cricket teams from Japan and Mexico and parts of South America. So actually cricket is a global sport. And what's even more interesting for us who are interested in the climate crisis, the climate emergency, is how all these major cricketing nations are impacted detrimentally by the climate emergency. And so I know you probably heard a lot about the Caribbean, the challenges there. So I don't really need to go in there, but this is just a handful from the last 5 years of examples where impacted cricketing nations are impacted and how it impacts cricket specifically. Back in 2018, players retiring hurt down in Australia during heat waves, South Africa reaching day zero in terms of water crisis. And you cannot play cricket if you can't maintain the ground. It's so vulnerable. You cannot, the ground will either be too wet, too dry, in this case, too dry. Again, back to Australia, devastating bushfires that wiped out biodiversity beyond belief, but also, you know, direct impact on facilities in terms of fire, in terms of direct gain, but it also is smog and the air quality issues related to bushfires. And it's quite interesting transition. You know, this looks like a scene from COVID, but this is again about bushfires, but that led into COVID, which impacted sport significantly globally, like everything else, in terms of bringing sport to its needs financially. And some will say COVID is also related to the climate emergency. Coming closer to home where I am in the UK, and this is this year, this is Worcester County Cricket Club, which floods every year, and I'll speak about that a bit more. We had 7 named storms over the last winter, which also brings high wind speed, power cuts in the north of the country, which lasted a week with the snowstorms, windstorms that caused minor damage, at least not too devastating, but the flooding is the worst every year now. And back later on in May, the major heat wave in India brought IPL to its knees to a bit. Back in England, 3 heat waves this summer, and the worst being in July, where we had record-breaking temperatures over 40 degrees centigrade, something I'd never experienced in the Caribbean, thanks to the impact of being near the sea, but 40 degrees centigrade is never heard of before in England. And obviously, most recently, just in advance of England touring Pakistan, they had the floods in Pakistan covering over 1/3 of the country. So, and cricket is impacted across all of these things. And this is just a handful of examples. And so you can find out more about the impacts of the climate emergency on cricket. There's a report titled Hit for Six, the impact of climate change on cricket, which you can Google, you find on the internet. And it also covers the West Indies. So it's a global report. Also last year, Sky Sport did a mini documentary entitled Cricket's Climate Crisis. But this is not just about cricket. Sport in general has been calling out about the issue because athletes and venues have been highlighting for quite a while the challenge they face with the changing climate conditions. And so there's another report called Playing Against the Clock, and there's a podcast, Emergency on Planet Sport, and there's several more examples, but I would encourage you to have a look if you're interested in this space. So coming back to the UK and England and Wales specifically, because the England and Wales Cricket Board, the ECB, which has a silent W in it, covers this area. And on the map on the right-hand side, you'll see the 18 major match venues, but we also look at 3,500 recreational ground cricket clubs, and also a further probably 3,000 locations where cricket is played, be it on council park areas or in schools and so forth. So the ECB, as the national governing body for cricket in England and Wales, oversees participation in the sport. We're a not-for-profit organization, and we support both the professional game and the recreational game. And interestingly, if you look at the map, just if you draw a diagonal line from the southwest to the northeast, to the south of that line, so London and the eastern area, that is predominantly impacted by drought. And into the northwestern area, if you go further west and further north, it's flooding. That is the predominant issue. But 40% of our clubs and our facilities are at risk of flood and drought. And interestingly, the ECB pays out over £1 million every year in flood relief. And 1 year alone, we paid out £3 million on uninsured losses and restoration. So this is a financial problem for us, and it's only going to get worse. Again, I said I'll come back to Worcester County Cricket Ground. This floods every year, and I had to check the numbers, but I think the worst case scenario, it floods to about 4 meters. That's how bad it gets. They have had to adapt. They can't sell this ground. It has no value. Interestingly enough, it was bought back in the middle of the 19th century. They knew it was very low-grade land. It's on a floodplain. It has a river on either side of it, so it's not surprising it floods. What is becoming increasingly problematic is the intensity of the situation, the storm intensity, and so they've adapted. So nothing of value is at ground level. They are also providing, interestingly, a service to the city of Worcester in that they are essentially a flood defense. So in my mind, Worcester County Council should be actually giving them more support along the way. So sorry, in the right-hand corner, you can see that's what it usually looks like when it's not flooded. This is a recreational ground in the north. And all of my examples here are about flooding, by the way. And this is another one about not only the flood itself, but about maintenance, which, you know, there are things that we can do to make sure that to mitigate the impacts of major downpours and so forth. And this one, if you can't see it, but on the right of this image is a main road which had a drain, and that was blocked. And so obviously all the water that would have flown over, you know, flowed over the ground was trapped here. And what happens after major floods on grounds, and this is the actual club where Ben Stokes used to play up north. This costs about £50,000 to fix and mend, just the ground itself. So it is, again, a significant financial cost. And this is Appleby in Cumbria. And right in the center, you'll see in the middle of the flood is that clubhouse. And that is actually a new structure, and that was probably reinstated in 2017. And this is raised up around above anticipated flood levels. So this is almost a semi-success story in that previously it was wiped out, and but now everything within the clubhouse is being protected and saved. Obviously, the village is getting more at risk of severe flooding all the time. Luckily, in this case, you know, usually the water is not got so full of contaminants, so the sediment can be dealt with. So it doesn't look it, but this is almost a success story. But again, a case of adaptation, and that does cost money. So just coming back to cricket in general, back in 2019, the ECB was working on their 5-year strategy for the sport in England and Wales, and it was called Inspiring Generations. It's about getting more participation amongst women and girls and Asian community and the Afro-Caribbean community in England and Wales. And a lot of this is about getting more children playing the sport. But also, we know that children and young people are the one most concerned about the climate emergency. And this is also a fundamental part of the ECB strategy. You know, it's not only about the fact that we need to do this to save our sport, we need to do this to help inspire our the participants we want to come and bring into our sport. But then we also think about more practical things. And this is like a organogram showing our key stakeholders and who's interested in the sport of cricket and who do we have to work with. So obviously all the ones highlighted in green are the ones that we directly are part of our control, our core staff, the playing staff, because we manage the national teams and the officials, our core operations, running teams and competitions and supporting cricket in England ways. So our core operations will be around events, and competitions, and then supporting cricket in England and Wales is all the participation activities we do with the recreational games, schools and so forth, and other charities. And also through our facilities team, supporting our facilities, the facilities across the country. But then we also collaborate obviously with other national governing bodies, the UK government, other sports, and then we also have partnerships, media partners and so forth, commercial partners, supply chain. And then obviously the most impactful places are those people we influence, including our spectators and our fans. And globally, we have 2.5 billion people who are identified as fans of cricket. So you can imagine the impact we could have if we demonstrate great performance in this area. And, you know, we also are recognizing that you're more likely to bring in better commercial partners once you start doing more interesting and progressive things in this area as well. So just to talk about our engagement with the first class counties. So these are the major cricket playing counties. So some of you may know about Surrey and Glamorgan and Gloucestershire and Lee, you know, up in Yorkshire, Lancashire, where I am actually in Manchester, so Old Trafford. And so I have at the beginning of this year, I started a sustainability working group with those facilities, and to highlight, to start kind of drilling down on sustainability strategies, particularly for the facilities, but also for their events. I asked the question, what are you finding the key challenges in the area of sustainability? And this is a snapshot of the word cloud that came up. So you can see it's quite a diverse amount. So not just things like drought threat and basically sustainable fertilizers, for example, but water use came up, electricity, and waste management, and waste was the big challenge that all the facilities were facing. So it's quite interesting to see what were top of their agenda. And I must point out, this is at the beginning of February. That's important to note. If you did this word cloud now, you'll probably find that energy was the #1 item on the word cloud. But it kind of also highlights the diversity and the broad nature of environmental sustainability without even looking at social and economic and so forth. So 2022, and like I said, energy has become the issue. And for us, originally, our plan was to talk about energy efficiency before the energy crisis, because that's a major part of drilling down our carbon emissions and so forth. But it's accelerated by this fluctuating and volatility in the energy market, and it showing that coming out of COVID, again, there was higher demand, then we had supply chain issues, and then obviously Putin invading Ukraine kind of made it even 10 times worse, literally. And obviously, can you imagine the energy bills related to big facilities? When they've quadrupled in some areas, that's huge challenge for people who are already struggling and on their knees coming out of COVID and low revenue. So this is the challenge we were working with. So we accelerated our energy efficiency guidance. We've been working with various venues, looking at ways that we can help bring this down. And obviously there's a kind of, the only positive coming out of this, it also helps accelerate that reduction in carbon emissions. But most of these main venues that have 100% renewable energy as their sources. So it's interesting to look at this economically as well as environmentally. So another thing coming out of that big word cloud is that now everybody needs to have a direction of travel. And so we're pulling together not all the good stuff that's been happening in the past, looking at what we can do now and start road mapping what we need to do for the next 10 years. and how we can approach that. And obviously, when you are strapped for cash, you have to think about what are the easiest things that we can do as soon as possible to make major impacts. And what we are doing is we're working collaboratively with the various key stakeholders in the network to see how we can set a reasonable but as well as ambitious kind of roadmap for that is suitable for everyone. This is recognizing that across the network, you have some players who are far ahead in this area and doing really well. If you look at the likes of Lord's Cricket Ground in central London with easy access to public transportation and also ground source heat pumps and so forth, they're well ahead in their sustainability ambitions, and others who are a lot less resourced, a lot less easy public transportation and have a lot further to go. So it's about bringing everybody up to speed and setting out good ambitions that for everybody. This is about writing strategies, but this is a side note. I took this picture a couple of summers ago. If anyone knows where this is, it'd be great if you could highlight now, but if not, I wouldn't blame you for not recognizing it. This is actually in central London. This is in Regent's Park. Right in the top left-hand corner is like a circular building called the Hub. This space is where in the park people play cricket during the summertime. And what's great about what Regent's Park have been doing, they've been putting up these biodiversity areas around. And this is one of the things that we want to do with our facilities is to encourage increase in biodiversity, even though generally speaking, cricket grounds are like a biodiversity desert, which is, so we have to look at other ways where we can introduce more biodiversity in cricket facilities. So that was just an aside, but I used it as a background of what you are the key pillars within a sustainability strategy. Governance is how do you embed sustainability into everything you do. Doing is across procurement strategies, who you're dealing with on your supply chain, but also basically making sure policies are in place, and you'll be surprised at how unregulated the sports sector is in relation to construction. There's no requirements anywhere. So we have to be ambitious and say we want to sign up to ISO 14001 or ISO 2012 one, which is about sustainable events. But that is options that we are talking through now with our key stakeholders. Then there are the actions, and those are the easy practical things you could be doing and listing out all the things you need to do, addressing your direct impacts. And the major part is engagement, is working with our partners. That could be our media partners like Sky, who are the biggest contributor to the money that's coming into the sport, but also commercial partners. Education advocacy is really important. And again, I think it's interesting how much more influence we can have in sport than when I was an engineer, where you're talking about engineering and sustainability, but you have a much smaller audience. A cricket player can tweet something and it has a reach of 1 million people. So imagine kind of transferring that knowledge through those who do have the global reach and can reach our spectators. So it's about marrying up the two. And this is how you kind of skin the cat, so to speak, with strategy. It's about, we're just past the essential area, taking stock, because data is the #1 thing that's hard to gather, and looking for those easy wins, and then now building a plan and putting together strategy. And on this pathway, it's about the governance and so forth, corporate processes and governance, people, partners, offices, and building management, venues and events. But you can also look at it in terms of your key areas of focus: climate action, energy, water, travel, transport, food, for example, circular economy, resource conservation, and natural environment, biodiversity, and avoiding pollution. Same kind of process. And so we'll look at both ways to make sure our strategy is quite comprehensive. Again, another cricketing background. This is Lords. This is essentially where my office is. And just to highlight the sort of things that we measure with respect to our carbon emissions, and we're gathering data and all of these things is really challenging, especially when financial systems were not set up to gather these sort of data. So there's a lot of things to consider, and that's what we're working through at the moment. Just to show you about events impacts. So we've been doing a study this summer on some major events, and this is indicative. It's not finalized, and this is for one day of one match, and I'm not going to be able to say which one, in a city location, just to show that when you consider spectators, food and drink is actually nearly 3/4 of the impact. Fan travel is a lot less, and that's probably because it's not an international match. If we had to consider fan travel for international match, it might be significantly more. And the slithers at the top are actually broken down into electricity to do with primarily with floodlights, broadcast emissions, and what we call event overlay. That's how you dress a venue for a specific events. That is mostly related to transport of those teams going from venue to venue, and then a bit about the materiality of what they're doing. And then a few other things we've been doing this year, again, addressing the energy crisis and how we want to make our recreational game more environmentally sustainable in terms of energy efficiency and so forth. We put out the guidance this summer because many clubs are struggling, and this has actually accelerated something we already had planned to do. But also, how do you prepare your pitches under drought restrictions? Many pitches require significant amount of water, outfields as well, but we don't necessarily water the outfields, especially not in a drought. But you can't play cricket if you don't maintain your pitches very well. That's the square right in the middle where the batsmen stand. And we also put out guidance of how to work in the heat and so forth. And now in the left-hand corner, which might seem like an insignificant thing, you see the blue water butts. This last summer, 2021, there was a lot of commentary about players still using single-use plastic bottles. And this kind of goes against what we are trying to achieve with eliminating single-use materials and products. And also the venues have sustainability plans around that. And so we said, let's get them into the habit of using reusable bottles. And just doing this by putting these water butts also signals to the spectators, obviously, that we're taking this seriously, that they should be doing this too, is setting examples. And hopefully it has a major impact. And a lot more people were using the water taps around the sites and refilling their bottles instead of buying single-use plastic water bottles, for instance. So this is about messaging and communication, and that's how we are influencing. We're putting out more and more information about what's going on around cricket with respect to sustainability, making sure spectators have the right info available to them of how to make sustainable choices when they come to the ground, and collaborating with our media partners, raising awareness with Sky Zero around sustainable actions that can be taken, and encouraging everybody to do more in this space. So I just end on this image. This is me this time last year actually, with the England women, and I did a whole talk with them about the climate crisis and raising their awareness of things that we could be doing, and shared some books with them. Some of you, I don't know if you can see very well, I've got Donut Economics, you have Project Drawdown, and also How Bad Are Bananas, which is a great reference book. If you haven't read it, have a look. But the England women team are very much engaged in this space. They take it very seriously. They've been doing a lot to try and reduce their emissions as far as they can. They're very conscious that flying is a major problem for them. But they also, at the beginning of this year, when they were touring Australia and New Zealand, said we are really worried about our flight emissions, and they are teamed up with, we got them engaged with Cricket Australia and their project to deal with solar panels. And they were raising money to help counteract their emissions. So this is a challenge for all elite sports. If you're a national team, you have to unfortunately fly. So we're looking at ways, and we also work with our aviation partners to see if we're getting the most efficient flights and so forth. So it is something that's ongoing work that has to be done with our supply chain, but getting athletes engaged in this space and using those who are really enthusiastic to voice and support climate action is really important and impactful for us. So I'll just leave it there, and I just say thank you very much for your time and attention. I know it's not structural engineering, but I hope it was interesting. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Thank you very much.